The day my children sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where I made their lunches for 18 years, they handed me a brochure for Sunrise Gardens Memory Care and Assisted Living. I wasn't sick. I wasn't confused. I was 50 years old with a sharp mind, a healthy body, and a bank account worth $11 million. And my own children wanted me to put away. They smiled at me like they were doing me a favor. And then I realized they didn't want me gone for my sake. They wanted me gone for my money. But here's what they didn't count on. I had already made my decision, and that decision was going to destroy everything they thought they were inheriting. Before I tell you what happened next, because trust me, this story is going to shock you, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now and give this video a thumbs up. This story is one I've never told out loud before, and I want it to reach people who need to hear it. And I have a question for you. If your own children tried to take everything from you, your freedom, your money, your dignity, what would you do? Tell me in the comments below. I'm reading every single one. My name is Carol Whitfield, and before you feel sorry for me, I want you to know something. I don't need your pity. What happened to me would have crushed most people. It nearly crushed me. But by the end of this story, you're going to understand why losing everything I thought I had was the greatest gift I ever received. I'm 50 years old. I live in a small house on the edge of Lake Monroe in Central Florida. There are wildflowers in the yard now, and a garden I never had time to grow before, and a neighbor named Henry who brings me tomatoes from his backyard every Saturday morning. My life is quieter than it has ever been, and I have never been happier. But 12 months ago, I was sitting alone in a room that smelled like antiseptic and synthetic lavender, watching through a small window as an orderly pushed an old man in a wheelchair past my door. I was wearing a paper bracelet with my name on it. I had arrived at Sunrise Gardens with one suitcase and a heart full of disbelief. And the two people responsible for putting me there, my son, Marcus, and my daughter, Vivian, were probably already at my house deciding which furniture to sell. So, let me take you back. Let me show you how a woman who gave everything she had to her children ended up alone in a nursing home at 50. And let me show you what she did about it. I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, the middle child of a school librarian and a plumber. We were not rich, we were not poor. We were the kind of family where everyone worked and nobody complained because complaining didn't get supper on the table. I married young, 22 years old, fresh out of East Tennessee State with a business degree, and I married Daniel Whitfield, who was handsome and ambitious and full of plans. For a while, those plans actually worked. Daniel started a small manufacturing company, industrial parts, nothing glamorous, and I ran the finances. I handled the books, the payroll, the contracts, the taxes. I was the reason that company didn't collapse 3 times in the first decade. By the time Marcus was born, we were comfortable. By the time Vivian came along 4 years later, we were doing well. And by the time Marcus was 12, Daniel's company had become something genuinely significant. We had accounts with 3 of the top automotive manufacturers in the country. We had a team of 60 employees. We had a house in a gated community outside Tampa with a pool and a guest cottage. And then Daniel got sick. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3, discovered on a Tuesday, and by the following spring, he was gone. He was 49 years old. I was 46. Marcus was 24. Vivian was 20. The grief was enormous, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had a company, a staff, 2 grieving children, and obligations I could not walk away from. So I worked. I worked through the pain the way I had always worked through everything, quietly, relentlessly, one day at a time. Within 2 years, I had sold the company at a number that still takes my breath away when I say it out loud, $11 million after taxes and fees. I put it into a trust and kept living modestly because money had never been the point for me. The point had always been the people, my kids, my family. That's what I believed in. That belief was about to be tested beyond anything I could have imagined. After Daniel died, something shifted in my children that I didn't want to see. I told myself it was grief. I told myself they were processing loss in their own way. I made excuses, the way mothers do, because loving your children means believing the best about them, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. Marcus had always been practical. Even as a little boy, he kept a running tally of his Halloween candy and negotiated trades with his sister like a junior commodities broker. After his father's death, that practicality curdled into something harder. He started asking questions about the trust, not in the warm way a son asks about his family's security, but in the precise, legal-sounding way of someone who has been consulting with a financial advisor they haven't told you about. Vivian was subtler. She called every Sunday, and the calls were warm, and I loved hearing her voice. But slowly, over months, the calls changed shape. She started talking about how much stress she was under, her mortgage, her husband Derek's business struggles, the kids' school tuition. She started suggesting that maybe I should think about the future and simplify my life. She sent me articles about independent living communities. She used words like downsizing and transition planning in the same casual voice she used to ask about my garden. I noticed, but I told myself I was being paranoid. These were my children. I had driven them to soccer practice and stayed up when they were sick and co-signed their first apartments. They loved me. Of course they loved me. About 8 months after Daniel's death, Marcus came to visit with a woman I didn't recognize, a sharp-suited woman named Patricia, who turned out to be an estate planning attorney. He introduced her as someone who can help us organize things going forward. They sat at my kitchen table with folders and charts and explained, calmly and at some length, that the current structure of my trust was inefficient and that a restructure would benefit everyone. What they meant, though they didn't say it directly, was that they wanted access to the money while I was still alive. I told them I needed to think about it. Patricia smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Of course." They left the charts on the table. I didn't sleep that night. 3 weeks after that visit, I fell on my back porch. It was raining, the wood was slick, and I went down hard. Nothing was broken, I was sore and shaken, nothing more, but Marcus and Vivian treated it like a catastrophic event. Within 48 hours, they had both flown in and were sitting across from me in my living room with an expression I recognized from the estate planning meeting. Organized, rehearsed. Marcus started. He talked about safety, about living alone in a large house was a liability at this stage of life. Vivian held my hand and told me they were worried, that they loved me, that they just wanted what was best for me. And then Marcus slid the Sunrise Gardens brochure across the coffee table. I stared at it for a long time. It was glossy. There were photographs of smiling older adults in a sunlit dining room, a woman doing yoga on a lawn, a man reading a newspaper in an Adirondack chair. The tagline read, "Where every day is a gift." "Mom," Vivian said softly, "it's really beautiful. We went and visited it last week. There's a watercolor class on Thursdays." They had visited last week. Without telling me, they had already chosen the place where they planned to put me. I looked at my son's face. I looked at my daughter's face. And for the first time in my life, I did not recognize the people sitting in my living room. "You want me out of this house," I said. There was a pause. Then Marcus said carefully, "We want you to be safe, Mom, and we want to make sure everything is managed responsibly going forward." There it was, managed responsibly. He wasn't talking about me, he was talking about the money. I agreed to go. I know that probably surprises you. After everything I've told you, you might have expected me to have stood up and told them to get out of my house. But grief does strange things to you, and shock does strange things. And there is a particular kind of helplessness that comes over you when the people you love most in the world look at you like a problem to be solved. I agreed, and I packed one suitcase, and Marcus drove me to Sunrise Gardens on a Tuesday in April. He carried my bag in and talked to the staff like I wasn't there and signed some forms and kissed me on the forehead and said he'd call to check in. And then he left. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed in my assigned room and I stared at the wall for a long time. The wall was beige. There was a print of a meadow above the dresser. Somewhere down the hall, someone was watching a game show at high volume. I am not someone who cries easily. I didn't cry at Daniel's funeral. I cried at night, alone, the way I did most hard things. But sitting in that room, on that bed, I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. I just sat there with tears running down my face, trying to understand how I had raised two people who could do this, and what I had done wrong, and whether there was something fundamentally broken inside me that made this possible. Then something happened. It took about 3 days. The tears dried up, the shock faded, and in the space where grief and disbelief had been, something else began to grow. Something quiet and cold and absolutely certain. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. My attorney, not the sharp-suited woman Marcus had brought to my table. Her name was Ruth Haynes, and she had been handling Daniel's estate alongside me for 3 years, and she was very, very good at her job. "Ruth," I said when she answered, "I need to make some changes." Here is what my children did not know. I had never touched the trust structure. I had listened to Marcus's proposal with a neutral expression, and I had said I would think about it, and then I had done exactly nothing. The trust was still mine, completely and entirely under my sole control. In the weeks before I went to Sunrise Gardens, I had been quietly making arrangements. Not in secret, exactly, but alone, the way I had always handled the most important things in my life. During my 3rd week at Sunrise Gardens, I met a woman named Dolores. She was 71 years old and had worked for 30 years as a home health aide before a series of strokes had made that impossible. Her daughter had died young. She had no other family, she lived on Social Security and a small pension, and she received no visitors. And she was, despite everything, one of the most genuinely warm and generous human beings I had ever encountered. Dolores adopted me the way some people adopt stray cats, without asking permission, without preamble, simply by appearing with 2 cups of coffee from the communal kitchen and sitting down across from me in the activity room and saying, "You look like someone who needs a friend and doesn't know how to ask for one." She was right. We talked every day. She told me about her life, the patients she had cared for, the ones she had held when they died, the satisfaction of work that mattered. She had nothing by any material measure, and she was, without question, the richest person I had met in years. It was during one of those conversations that a decision I had been circling for weeks became completely, unmistakably clear. What I had been working on with Ruth, quietly and deliberately for the past month, was a complete restructuring of my estate. I established a charitable foundation, the Whitfield Foundation for Independent Living, funded with the majority of the trust. The foundation's mission? To provide housing support, legal resources, and financial literacy programs for women over 50 who had been displaced from their homes by family members or financial abuse. Because as Ruth had told me in our first conversation after my arrival at Sunrise Gardens, what happened to me happened to more women than most people realized. A portion of the funds went to Dolores, not as charity, but as a formal gift, with a letter explaining exactly why. I wrote that letter myself, and I will not pretend I didn't cry while writing it. A small residual amount, enough to be comfortable, nothing more, I kept for myself. The rest, the overwhelming majority of $11 million, left the family and went into the world to do work that actually mattered. Marcus and Vivian received nothing. And then I called an attorney who specialized in elder law, found a supportive housing advocate through Ruth's network, and within 6 weeks of arriving at Sunrise Gardens, I walked out of there with my suitcase and never looked back. I was well. I had always been well. No one had ever done a single medical assessment suggesting I needed residential care. I had simply been told I did, and in a moment of grief-blunted shock, I had believed the people who were supposed to love me. I rented the small house by Lake Monroe, I planted the garden, I breathed, and then the calls started coming. Marcus found out about the trust changes the way I expected him to, through the attorney. Patricia, his sharp-suited woman, apparently had some familiarity with the original trust documentation and noticed, during what Marcus had evidently been counting on as a routine check-in process, that the assets had been substantially moved. He called me on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the garden. I let it ring. He called again. I answered the third time. "Mom," his voice was controlled, but I could hear the thing underneath it. "We need to talk about the trust." "I thought we might," I said. "Patricia says the assets have been transferred, that almost everything is gone." "Not gone," I said. "Redirected. There's a difference." The silence on the line was extraordinary. "What did you do?" he said, and then the control slipped, just slightly. "Mom, what did you do?" "I did what I should have done sooner," I said. "I made my own decisions about my own money. Isn't that what you were worried I couldn't do anymore?" He flew down the following weekend with Vivian. They sat across from me at my small kitchen table, a different table, in a different house, and they were angry and wounded and disbelieving, and they said things I expected, about how I wasn't thinking clearly, about how this wasn't what Dad would have wanted, about how they had just been trying to protect me. I let them talk. I had learned patience over the past months. When they finished, I looked at them both for a long moment. "I put you in a home," I said. "I was 50 years old and healthy, and you put me in a home because you wanted my money. I'm not angry about it anymore, but I want you to hear me say that out loud. That is what you did." Vivian began to cry. Marcus stared at the table. "I love you both. I will always love you, but I will not pretend what happened didn't happen. And the money is gone. It's doing something important now, and that is not going to change." They contacted a probate attorney. Their attorney contacted Ruth. Ruth's documentation, as I might have expected, was completely airtight. I had been of sound mind, full legal capacity, and sole authority over every decision I had made. There was no case. There was nothing to contest. Within 2 months, they stopped trying. The Whitfield Foundation launched its first program 9 months after I established it. In the first year, we helped 43 women who had been pushed out of their homes, coerced into surrendering financial control, or simply worn down by family pressure into giving up autonomy they had every right to keep. Some of them were in their 80s. Some of them were my age. Every single one of them deserved better than what they were given. Dolores used her portion of the gift to move into a private apartment, not a facility, a real apartment with a kitchen and a back porch and a small yard where she grew tomatoes. She was, she told me when we had coffee one morning, happier than she had been in 20 years. I received a letter from her once in that first year. It said, You didn't save me, I was doing fine, but you reminded me that I was worth something to somebody. That matters more than you know. I framed that letter. It hangs in my kitchen. As for Marcus and Vivian, I know some of you are wondering. We are not close. Not the way we once were, or the way I had imagined we would be when they were small children, and the future seemed full of possibility. But we are not entirely estranged either. Vivian calls occasionally. The calls are careful, tentative, like walking on ice. I answer them. We talk about small things. I don't know yet what will come of it. Marcus sent a card on my birthday. It said, "I'm sorry, Mom." Just those 3 words, nothing else. I put it in my dresser drawer. I'm not sure what to do with it yet. I'm leaving space for the possibility that it means something real. This morning I woke up before sunrise, which I do most mornings now. I made coffee and took it out to the back porch, and I sat there watching the sky go from dark to gray to the softest possible shade of pink as the sun came up over the lake. A great blue heron was standing in the shallows. It stood completely still for a long time, and then it moved, one slow, deliberate step, and I watched it and thought about patience, about the way some things can only be approached slowly, carefully, without rushing. I am 50 years old. I have more good years ahead of me than behind me, if I'm lucky. I have a garden and a neighbor and a foundation that is doing real work. I have a heron that visits most mornings and a cup of coffee that is exactly the right temperature. I don't have $11 million. I have enough, and I have something better than money. I have the absolute certainty that when the moment came, I chose correctly. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, though I understand why it might look like that from the outside. I chose it out of clarity, because I finally understood what my life was for, and it was not for accumulating wealth to hand off to people who had forgotten how to love me. It was for this: the heron, the garden, the women we helped who didn't have anyone in their corner, the look on Dolores' face when I told her she was going to be okay. People ask me sometimes, friends, people who know the story, whether I regret it, whether I wish I had handled things differently, whether some part of me wonders what would have happened if I had fought to keep the money and rebuild the relationship and find some middle ground. I don't regret a single thing. Here's what I know. Your children do not inherit your life. You owe them love. You owe them guidance. You do not owe them your freedom, dignity, or your sense of self. And when someone, anyone, even someone you raised and loved with every ounce of yourself, tries to take those things from you, you are allowed to say no. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to start over. It is never too late to start over. My name is Carol Whitfield. I am 50 years old. I live by a lake with wildflowers in my yard and a garden that is finally beginning to grow. And I feel more like myself than ever.